Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is DJ Duronslet. I am Vice President, Human Resources and Co-Chief Diversity Officer for OUTFRONT, the largest out-of-home media company in North America. And I'm so very proud to moderate this segment of Influenced by OUTFRONT, Representation Matters, the Power of Inclusive Marketing. Today, we're going to talk about the power, the significance, and quite frankly, the necessity of inclusive marketing. We'll talk about some do's and don'ts, the ways that brands can expand their reach, build deeper connections with their audiences, and ultimately strengthen consumer loyalty. We've assembled an amazing panel of experts to explore these topics with you today. And I'd like to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves to you. Let's start with Halle. Halle, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Halle Hutchison. I am the Chief Brand Officer at Varo. And Varo is a startup bank. We're really kind of a one of a kind. We're a fintech, but we're also a fully chartered bank. And I was attracted to Varo, like most employees at Varo, for the mission. We are trying to bring basic financial benefits and services to everyone, but specifically to people that have been prevented from having access to those services in the past. So I'm very happy to be here and have this conversation.
Thank you much, Halle. Welcome. Tasha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Tasha Blackman. I'm a marketing consultant and I provide interim leadership to multi-brand retailers as well as D2C brands. I've spent over 15 years in the retail industry working across major retailers, Fortune 200 companies, all the way up to late stage startups.
Fantastic. Welcome, Tasha. Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Graham. I am the Chairman of Public Relations and Communications for the 100 Black Men of America. This is my third iteration in this position, as every time Chairman Deutsch wins election as the chairman of the organization, he seems to rope me in to this position. One of the things that the 100 Black Men is focused as a 501c3 on ensuring that youth in inner cities in particular have an opportunity to mesh with seasoned and highly achieving Black men in mentoring. But not only that, we also focus on education and leadership and economic empowerment and health and wellness. Those are the 5 pillars that make up the 100 Black Men's goal to positively impact the United States of America and the world, since we have chapters in Turks and Caicos and London. So it's a pleasure to be here and share with you that which the 100 is doing and how we're impacting the youth in our communities.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Welcome. And rounding out our panel, Fahad.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fahad Khawaja. I am the founder and president of an organization called HUE, which is a 501c3 nonprofit focused squarely on a long-term vision of building equity and prosperity for all of our communities. Our mission is all about amplifying voices of people of color, increasing our visibility and paving a path to help us rise, with a focus particularly on those who are looking to get access to new career opportunities. So what we do as a 501c3 is we provide resources, direct access to jobs, ways to expand your networks. We have a mentorship and coaching program and a number of other efforts that we do that are all about helping uplift our communities, with the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if we have, end up lifting up communities of color, we'll lift up all of us.
Fantastic. Welcome, Fahad, and welcome to all of you. So to kick off this discussion, I want to start by sharing a personal experience that I just had a couple of weeks or so ago. A friend posted a slideshow on Facebook. It was titled "What the 70s Felt Like to Me." It was a conglomeration of images taken from old pictures or a few print ads, television shows, commercials, magazines. And the video was actually set to Fleetwood Mac's song "Landslide." I don't know if you all have ever heard it, but as I was watching the images flash across the screen, I heard this line in the song and I saw my reflection. And suddenly my trip down memory lane was totally snapped as I thought to myself, nope. I don't see my reflection at all. As a matter of fact, I don't see anything that even remotely looks close to me. And out of the 18 images of actual people, only one of them was diverse. And the weirdest thing happened. Although I recognized most all of the brands, the disconnect that I felt in that moment was like palpable. And then I literally had to remind myself, hey, 1970s, time out. And then fast forward to today, how apropos that you are all here with us to discuss this still incredibly relevant topic, how brands can genuinely counter that very disconnect that consumers oftentimes feel, and then the significance of seeing one's reflection in brand marketing. And I want to start by talking about two campaigns before we really get into it. And Halle, I want to start with one of your recent campaigns. Can you talk to us about how understanding the importance of diversity and representation influenced and or inspired Varo's A Bank for All of Us campaign?
Yeah, so, inclusion has been in the DNA of Varo since it was created. And I came on board as sort of as a in the middle of this mission and bringing this sort of vision to life. And the campaign was designed to launch the bank. I mentioned earlier that Varo became a fully chartered bank, which does distinguish it from other fintechs out there. And so this campaign was to launch the brand in a big way. But what we also wanted to do, and you kind of narrated it, was we wanted to make sure that our customers and our target customers saw themselves in the campaign. The tagline, "A Bank for All of Us," it's inherently inclusive, and we wanted to make sure that it represented that. But the journey was interesting because, when we came up with the concept and just to narrate it, because I was trying to put a visual behind me, but it didn't work. The concept is that we take currency as kind of a symbol of banking and money in general, and we put images of modern day people, much more representative of the people that live in this nation versus who is on our currency today. Right. And we did it, as a way of getting attention. It's what you do when you're in marketing. But the journey was interesting because as we were making the campaign, we got a lot of questions from employees. They asked, who worked on this? Who developed this? Did you have a diverse group of people working on this? And it was interesting for me because we took a whole different path in the approval process of the campaign, because we made sure that we did have a diverse group of people at the agency working on it. Then we ran it by our ERGs internally, and we let them comment on it and give any, just open commentary on what they thought, which is not typical in marketing. You don't always run your campaigns, by that broad of a swath of people, but now it's common practice. We do it with all of our campaigns. And I think it's something that even if I work somewhere else in the future, I'm going to do it. I just think there's a new way to approach creative now, especially if you're trying to have more representation. You need to make sure that the group that's creating it also has that diverse representation. And so that was a real key learning for me in bringing this campaign to market.
That's fantastic. And I actually want to touch on that in just a little bit, because even in my experience with OUTFRONT, that's something that our creative marketing and our DEI group do very, very well together. And it is, you're absolutely right, it's incredibly important. So I want to touch base on that in just a second. But also, Michael, 100 Black Men of America just partnered with OUTFRONT during Black History Month. And currently we're spotlighting some pretty special individuals across the country. You mentioned, you touched upon this a little bit in your intro, but can you talk to us about that campaign and its relevance, and in particular, the importance of our youth seeing their positive media representation on our billboards throughout their communities?
Well, one of the slogans of the 100 Black Men that I think this campaign fits very nicely with is that what they see is what they'll be. So when you get an opportunity to see positive images of people that look like you, it shapes your perspective of what's possible. So that's why the partnership with OUTFRONT is so important, because it allows across a broad spectrum of the country for people to see those positive images and then be able to look inward and say, oh, that's me. I can be that. I can do that. that's something that I can aspire to, that is realistic. It's within the framework and the reality of my reality. I can make that work. So we truly love the partnership with OUTFRONT and the campaign and the positiveness that it has endured upon us and OUTFRONT.
Well, thank you so much. And the feedback that we're getting from that is phenomenal. You know, a second ago, you used two words, that's me. And earlier today, I was reminded, I'm sure, you know, there was a picture that went viral. I'm sure many of you saw it. This little adorable 2-year-old boy that saw his lookalike in Disney's film Encanto. And his mom and dad took a picture of him standing right next to the screen. And there was actually a video of how excited he was to see something or someone that he thought looked just like him. But research shows that adult consumers love seeing themselves as well. And recent research actually supports that, you know, well, especially given that 64% of consumers agree that they're more likely to purchase from a brand when people who look like them are represented in their ads. We certainly can't lose sight of that. And Tasha, you know, we're fast approaching the end of Black History Month. You know, next month is Women's History Month. What steps do you think brands can take to avoid the perception and sometimes, unfortunately, even the reality of ticking the box for multicultural marketing? And along those lines too, what do you think are some of the best practices for reaching multicultural markets year round?
Yeah, I think some of the best practices starts with first understanding what your customer base is. So I'm a firm believer in, you know, I think a lot of the magic happens when brand and data intersect. So it gets away from some of the, you know, the myths of who you think your brand is, who you think your customer is, and you can really get a clear demographic and psychographic of who's in that customer base. And I think it's also relooking at your mission statement. Diversity is something that happens every single day. When you look at, you know, your teams, you look at who works in an organization, people want to bring themselves to work every single day. So it's about making sure when you're creating your campaigns, it's infused into every single thing you do. I think it also goes down to also who works in an organization as well as a really critical piece of it. You know, we talk about having diversity on, you know, the senior executive level within organizations, but I think it goes even further than that. I think it's having diversity on every single level within an organization so that when a campaign gets created, in a simplified term, you know, a brief gets created, right? There's a person that puts the who, where, when, how of what needs to be created. And it goes along the line where the creative team, you know, do what they do, you know, then you have your creative view where everyone gives their feedback. This is where, you know, the conversation should start having, you know, like, does this really represent who our customer is? Let's go back to our campaign brief. We said we're trying to, you know, reach this audience, you know, as well as with our external partners, making sure they're clear on what the objectives are. So by the time it gets all the way up to the top, a lot of that conversation has already been had, but it's also a part of the everyday language for a brand. And I think that's some of the best practices versus waiting for, you know, a month to come and then it's, what are we going to do?
Right.
You know, it's an everyday part of your language for your brand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people want to be seen, represented accurately and appropriately, you know, and so obviously importance. Fahad, talk to us about, you know, the importance of things like tone and using customers' words, their stories, their images as your marketing campaign and not just in your marketing campaigns, especially as it relates to, you know, purpose-driven brand building and growth.
Sure. So when I talk about purpose-driven brand building and growth, it means that you are actually doing everything with a purpose that ultimately will serve people, it'll serve your customers, and that everything you do within your organization connects to that overall purpose. So the suppliers you're working with, the way that you operate on a day-to-day basis, the teams that you build, it all has to connect. And so to me, it's actually less about the tone and what you communicate. It's, are you designing for diversity in mind? Are you designing for people who are going to actually have their needs served? And are you doing it in a way that is better than the next, you know, company or organization out there? You know, one of the things I want to call out is related to what Tasha was just saying, and to some extent what Halle and Michael were saying as well. You know, in order to really be able to produce content that is going to connect with diverse audiences across the board, you need to have the right people in the room who are driving those decisions, whose voices are being heard, and who ultimately are going to actually create something that connects with people from lots of different backgrounds, right? When I say diverse audiences, I'm not using the word diverse as code for Black or brown. I really mean diverse audiences, right? Older, younger, Black, brown, multiracial, whatever it might be. That is today's world. Unfortunately, that is not today's C-suite. That is not today's senior manager level. Hue, my organization, just released research earlier today, actually, that showcases the state of inequity across the US. We actually did some work that showed numbers related exactly to what the other panelists were talking about. We have seen that representation is really, really important. And for people of color across the board, 80% of people are motivated by people who are at senior leadership levels who look like them. But it goes up even higher when you look at, Black Americans specifically versus Hispanic or Latinx versus Asian Americans. And so that piece around representation being so critical is foundational in being able to even create content, in being able to even be purpose driven, and being able to put your money where your mouth is and actions behind your words as a company.
Right. And thank you for that. What steps can brands take? I mean, obviously, we're talking about representation, both in and outside of the organization. But when a company is trying to reach a particular audience, and perhaps those working on that campaign may not have the life experience or with that audience, what are some steps that people can take to develop meaningful cultural intelligence? And I open that up to anybody on the panel.
I think one of the things is seeking external partners. If you do not have the partner in-house, definitely seeking out partners that have great reputation, great experience within speaking to this specific demographic. Also, just to add, I love what Fahad brought up in terms of diversity. It's more than just, your race, Black or brown, but it's really about age, body shapes, also, mobile ability as well. And those are things I think brands should also keep in mind, because when you look at, the world as a whole, we are different in so many different ways. And for someone to look at a campaign and say, oh my God, that looks like my next door neighbor, or that looks like me, or that looks like my mom, and they can relate to that, that builds brand loyalty at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And Halle, you were going to make a comment?
Yeah, a couple things. One, when you're talking about place-based marketing, like out of home, you can cast and use members of the community that creative will go in, to just make sure that it's just systemic. It's and then people literally see themselves and their neighbors in the advertising. That's one way to do it. The other way, a separate topic, is when you're trying to get that level of diversity in your organization, that can take time. I think one of the unexpected benefits of COVID, it sort of forced some companies that maybe were trying to hire people within, 40 miles of their office, wherever that office may be. COVID, sort of necessarily, we are now recruiting across the nation, which is nice. So that it's you can expand those boundaries a little bit by hiring people remotely. And then the other thing I think we talked about the other day was, it's because it may take a while to get it within your organization, develop a customer advisory council, and bring people in from your customer base all across the country, from all, representing a broad definition of diversity, like we just talked about, and run your work by them. And that's a way, and not just the advertising, but like Fahad was saying, your products, your services, what you're bringing to market. That's a way to get some more diverse perspectives into the mix when you maybe aren't quite there yet from, inside your organization.
I'd like to think what you were saying as well. I agree with what you both said, although I will challenge one piece. So I completely agree with what you're saying. What I would add is, in today's world, with the consumer landscape changing so rapidly and being so dynamic, and with needs of Gen Z versus all along the millennial spectrum versus anyone Gen X and beyond, the needs are so different. The way people respond is so different to marketing, to advertising, to communication, to content, to products, to services, to experiences. You need to be constantly in touch with your customers. And what I've built in the past that's been really effective is essentially an insights engine that's always on. So brands really have a responsibility and can build an insights engine where they're connecting with their consumers on an ongoing basis. They have people that they go to on a regular basis that can help inform product development. They can help inform innovation. They can help inform campaign development so that when the time comes, you don't have to seek out those people. They're already there in the fold and they're partners in your own development. The part that I wanted to challenge is the idea that it takes time to bring some of those diverse voices in-house. Because I do think, to Tasha's point from earlier, you can partner with organizations. You can find organizations that are doing that work already. And the great news is that there's a lot of us out here who are doing that already. And so where you're looking for those voices to come in, where you're looking for that sort of expertise that might feel a bit more niche or might feel out of your comfort zone or your own area of expertise, reach out. That's the thing. You can shortcut your way through. And from a recruitment standpoint, you can bring those people in pretty quickly. We actually have a lot of data on what are people from diverse backgrounds looking for to join companies, for example. And so tap into organizations like you and others out there that really can shortcut that so that you don't feel like you're stuck in a process where it's going to take time.
And I think also to add to that, we heard a lot about, the great resignation or sometimes the great realization happening. So there's a lot of talent that is available out there. I think the question ultimately comes down to your brand and what is your stance, what are your values and how it connects to, this employee, but the talent is out there. I think of LinkedIn as a really fantastic resource. There are tons of folks talking about that there. And Fahad, you mentioned your organization. I definitely think external partners are really a great asset to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Michael, you were going to make a comment.
Well, I was just going to chime in to say a lot of that is wonderful, but it really comes down sometimes to who green lights campaigns and what their position is when in their own personal experiences as to whether or not they think something fits their brand or not. Because you can do all of the great work at the marketing level, at the strategic level, but when it gets kicked up to C-suite, if you don't have representation that's there that says, okay, I see the value of this. I see us spending this amount of money to go in this direction because it's not only going to diversify our brand, but it's also going to internally and externally, it's going to give us the opportunity to grow our brand, to go into markets that we heretofore may not have thought about, or it can be dismissive to say that's not what we're trying to do. So it's making sure that you reach that the C-suite reaches out to external companies and takes advantages of those opportunities, and they're not stuck in their own way of this is what I've always done, so this is what I will continue to do. Makes a difference.
Yeah, and Michael brings up a great point as well, just in terms of that idea that just because you're there in a room doesn't mean you have the power, right? And you might not be that decision maker, right? And we've seen a lot of challenges for people within companies who are technically meant to be a lot of those decision makers, but they may not feel like they have the power. And so if they're trying to create marketing that's more inclusive and that reaches a more diverse audience, they may not be able to, right? So we've actually seen it with women of color quite a bit, where Hispanic or Latinx women are 6 times as likely to not feel seen at work for who they are versus white men. Overall, women of color are 5 times as likely. Multiracial women are 3 times as likely. And Hispanic Latinx women are 3 times as likely to not feel heard at work. So as if their voice is being stamped down, and overall women of color are, more than 1.5 times as likely to feel that. So that just speaks, I think, very directly to what Michael was talking about as well.
Right. We have a question. What is your all take on the importance of countering tokenism, stereotyping, things such as cultural appropriation, and best practices for personalizing versus generalizing? question.
I think for me, this goes back to what I mentioned, earlier, really understanding, leveraging that data to understand who your customer is, and then drilling down deeper, right? Because this is where the work really comes in. You have to get rid of the myths and the things that you've seen out there, because not everyone is necessarily doing it the way that it should be. And it's about drilling into these, digging deep into these communities and finding the resources so that you can understand, like, how do they want to be spoken to? How does someone want to be, to shown up from the content? When you think about, being in the retail space, what does the store experience look like when you're marketing to someone? When they walk into your environment, is it welcoming to them? Are they seeing product that resonates with them from a localized perspective? In certain pockets of the country, there are certain, initiatives that are really important. And this is where it also, is important to have, people on the ground, your local, let's say, store manager that you're constantly in touch with, and also providing them an outlet where they can provide you with resources. We talked about, the voice of the customer is critically important. But I think it's also the voice of, your internal partners are just as equally important as well, so that you can understand, what's happening, what is coming up next, what is important to that audience. Also the feedback from that audience of what you've done in the past, because, let's be real, we haven't all, hit the target at all times, and there's always room for feedback. But I think it's also keeping that feedback loop open, and then being a brand that's open to the feedback as well, and turning that into actionable insights so that you can improve it for next time.
I think one of the other things that's important that we haven't mentioned thus far here is bias. And before you begin to, you have to check yourself, because bias, and we've seen this in this country, where just the look of someone gives you an indication of what they may or may not be. And that's just based on your personal background and understanding of the world that you live in. That's not necessarily that of where people actually are. So when you're talking about, I look at it from an organizational perspective with the 100. We have to constantly overcome that which other people's biases consist of, what our audience is, our mentees, our communities, and that's based on media, because we see media every day, and it begins to move people to a particular thought process, because when you turn on the news, the first thing you see is crime. That's the number one thing. That's what most news organizations lead with. What's the most horrific thing that happened that day? And you can almost tell who committed what by whether or not you see an image versus something that's more generic, right? So that begins to influence people, and it speaks to their biases about how they perceive the marketplace to be. So when you're talking about branding as well, then you have to overcome some of that to make sure that just because somebody looks a particular way doesn't mean that they're that way.
Right.
And your branding then has to speak to, I'll give you an example. When I'm an East Coast cat from DC. When I first started going to California and going to Silicon Valley, right? Everybody I saw was in khakis and polo shirts. Well, in New York and DC, we wear suits, and you distinguish people by how they are dressed. But yet these people in khakis and polo shirts are multimillionaires in the tech world. So you can't judge who they are by what your perception of what they what they're wearing is. So we have to have the same, we have to employ the same kind of logic to just because we see a kid that has dressed the way, however they're dressed, doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. Doesn't mean that they're not going to pay attention to the brand, or that they're going to not buy the brand. So we can't make those kinds of distinctions simply based on appearances.
Absolutely. Entirely agree. And I think it, as all of you have spoken to, it starts with, I'm curious to know, and we talked about the importance of representation internally, having, a diverse representation inside your company. I'm going to assume that, universally, you all would say that diversity internally is going to help to translate into a more impactful campaign. What steps would you say, what can companies do internally from your experience to help facilitate more meaningful diversity and inclusion initiatives that help make, employees more aware, to Michael's point, of biases and things of that nature? Or maybe some of you can speak to your experiences.
And start off. What I would say is, in terms of what companies can do, it's probably simpler than most companies think. There's some really straightforward steps that can be taken to make sure that there is diversity in organizations, and also that the people who are from those backgrounds feel like what they're saying and doing matters and carries weight in decision making. So on the first one, what I would say, we at Hue have seen really consistently is, one, it's partnering with organizations that can help bring those people in. Two, it's making sure that in your interview slates, there are candidates from a lot of different backgrounds, right? Making sure that you won't accept anything below a certain percentage, because again, the data has shown, published in Harvard Business Review and other outlets, that having 2 or 3 people from diverse backgrounds in a slate significantly exponentially increases their likelihood of coming through, right? On that second point around voices carrying weight, I think, it ties to having people at all levels, right? A lot of companies out there will have people from diverse backgrounds at junior levels, at mid levels, but if they're not there at the senior level, that's very difficult. So having people who are at the senior level who are from those backgrounds, or if they're not, they're people who invest in executive sponsorship and can sponsor people from more junior levels and pave a clear career path for them to say, listen, we know that you've got what it takes. We want to help you get to the next level, because we know that ultimately it's going to help our company. It's going to help our brands. It's going to help our development of our products and services, and ultimately help our communication.
We have a question, another question from the audience. What brands do you think are setting gold standards in terms of recognizing nuances and culture and ethnicities of target audiences in their marketing?
I think one that, has been doing it really well is Rihanna with her beauty brand as well as her intimates brand. There was a time, a lot of brands were doing shade extensions, but she took shade extensions to the next level of increasing the number of, foundation shades, but also foundation shades that actually look good on you. Because there's a difference between saying, yes, I made it for you, and there's a difference between saying I made it for you and it actually looks good on you. And also in her marketing, showing, bodies, showing, complexions, showing people of different abilities that you've never seen before, and saying this is also beautiful. So she's also expanded what beautiful looks like, when for a long time, you're told this is what beauty is. And the other thing is within the intimate space, she's done that as well. It's been a part of her brand DNA since day one. It wasn't, oh, hey, we've got to go back and backtrack and create this for this person. It's like, no, we've been creating it for everyone since day one. And she's been really disruptive in that manner, which has been fantastic, because now it's been challenging other brands to say, oh, wow, there's a market for this. So, I applaud her in terms of, taking that approach and sticking with it all the way through and showing that beauty is in everyone.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll
Well,
actually, I'm going to let Michael go. I feel like I've been talking a bit too much.
I think that's an important point, Tasha, because redefining what beauty is in America and globally is essential. Because for far too long we said this is the epitome of beauty, and this isn't. So and that came along color lines in particular, because when you look at Black and brown people and Asiatic people, how can you just summarily dismiss all of those individuals, but yet we crave that level of beauty? And now, as we have evolved, and the country and the world has begun to evolve, we now see that that is what beauty is. It's not dismissing what we historically have said is beautiful. It's just more inclusionary, so that we have more people that say, well, this is beautiful too, and that's a wonderful thing. So I think your point is right on point.
Listen, we're getting close to wrapping up just that quickly. Time flies, but I'd like to ask very quickly, what are your predictions for the future of inclusivity and diversity in marketing?
What I have seen in agencies is a lot of the top agencies now are adding a member of the strategic team that represents diversity and inclusion or cultures. I think that's a really positive step in the right direction versus just having one strategist. It's a different approach, and I think that's a very promising step.
Anybody else? Okay, listen. So just that quick, we're out of time. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists once again, Halle, Tasha, Michael, and Fahad. And once again, all of you for joining us today. We hope that you found our session informative and perhaps inspiring. We really hope that we've equipped you with some thoughtful takeaways. And lastly, we want to challenge you not only to keep this conversation going, but to explore ways of creating impactful, meaningful consumer content. Please be on the lookout for future installments. And we ask you to remember that diversity and inclusion and representation matters always. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.